Hi, everyone. I'm just going to wait a little bit for people to enter, and then we'll get started. Okay, let's start. So hello and a warm welcome to you all joining us from around the world today. I'm Tess Wilkinson, Director of Education at Henley & Partners Education, which was launched 2 months ago in response to the increasing demands from clients for expert and impartial advice on the best global education options for their children. Now, one of the many benefits of investment migration is enhanced access to premium global education. And in unpredictable times, most of our clients are looking to secure world-class education for their children in top schools and universities that provide a stable, safe, and nurturing environment. The last 2 years have been enormously disrupted due to the pandemic, and whilst international education was still operating and the provision of online education for students put in place, the quality varied greatly, and the result is that many parents are now looking for other solutions to future-proof their children's education. Many of our clients are rightly confused as to who to turn to for advice regarding education and which countries they should send their children to so they can access great education that will equip them for the future. And by providing extensive sector-specific expertise through our global networks and highly experienced consultants, we work hand in hand with our families to ensure their child is placed in a school or university which matches their talents, aspirations, and of course, academic ability. And the good news is that many countries that host residence and citizenship by investment programs, such as the UK, the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and numerous European countries, are home to the best educational institutions. And with so many options, Henley & Partners Education is here to help you make one of life's most important and difficult decisions, choosing the right education for your child. And with this in mind, we're delighted to welcome you to this week's webinar series on global universities. And today and tomorrow, you may have heard the webinars yesterday, but we've got our wonderful university consultants who will share their expertise on the options available in the countries they specialise in. And one of the most popular and desired locations for higher education is Europe. And today I'm delighted to welcome my colleague David Hawkins, who will walk us through the higher education landscape in these countries and answer any questions that you may have. Now, throughout the webinar, please feel free to use the Q&A box below. You can find it at the bottom of the screen. Put your questions in there and I'll try and keep up with them, or maybe keep them till the end when we will have a Q&A session. So let me introduce you to David. He is one of the world's top independent counsellors, specialising in the supporting of families and students to enter some of the world's best globally ranked universities. And most importantly, helping students to work out which institutions are the best match for them. David is one of only 19 people in the world to hold the gold standard international affiliation with the Council of International Schools. And as an Oxford University graduate, David was the head of college counselling at the International School of Brussels, which is one of the largest in Europe. And before that was head of careers and a history teacher at Taunton Boarding School in the UK. David holds memberships in the International Association for College Admissions Counselling, the Independent Educational Consultants Association, the Higher Educational Consultants Association, and the Council of British International Schools. I've managed to say all that okay. So without further ado, David, I'm going to hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tess. Thank you for that very kind introduction. Hello, everybody, either joining us live or watching the recording. So when we talk about European universities, we are grouping together lots and lots of different countries. And I gave the talk yesterday on the United States and then Canada, and colleagues are giving talks in other countries as well. When it's with Europe, we kind of have to caveat the fact that there is not the demand to have a session on Dutch universities and French universities and German universities and Swiss universities and so on. For convenience, we put them all together. But unlike those other talks and webinars that are having, I'm going to have to be slightly more general about the information here. There are certainly commonalities about applying to universities in Europe, but we also have to understand that there's going to be quite a lot of complexity involved in each individual country. And so it's important that I give that kind of nuance. What I'll also focus on here is I'm going to be talking almost exclusively on courses in Europe taught in English. Once we start to delve into courses taught in the language of that country, again, the complexity and the nuance gets very, very complicated very, very quickly. These are things that I'm certainly very willing to advise on and to assist you with. But for the purposes of a general webinar today, I'm not going to delve into all those kind of things. So if there are questions that are more complex and specific to your particular situation, please do get in touch with Tess. The email will come up at the end and we can perhaps arrange some follow-up information there. So with those two things in mind, let me get started with some of the points about the sort of general sense of the basic situation of what happens with university in Europe. Unlike in North America, for those who were with us yesterday, we're talking again about a very focused degree structure. Like in most parts of the world, typically in Europe, we are going to university to study a subject. So we're in recognizable ground where I'm applying to this university to be a student of this course. There are some American-style liberal arts and sciences courses, both at some public universities, notably the university colleges in the Netherlands, but there are some actually American-style universities in Europe. Helpfully, they typically are called the American University of Paris, American University of Rome, etc. But on the whole, it's that single subject degree. Other things to bear in mind, however, that are potentially a little bit different from what you might be used to in, say, the UK or Asia. We have a very big difference between public and private universities in Europe. And in the public universities, typically on the whole, you are not finding universities delivering a residential university experience. So most public universities, certainly in continental Europe, in the public sector, are just delivering the education. The idea that you might be used to of universities, say in the Anglo sphere, the English-speaking countries where we go and live at university and we do clubs and societies and sports as well as going to class, isn't really the case in many of these public universities. You will find in a lot of countries there is no housing provided by that university. So that's a very different culture of university that we'll be looking for. We have a style of learning which can be quite project-based in many options as well, and I'll delve into some of that when we get further forwards, and that quite often links to what Europe has retained, and again many English-speaking countries have not, a difference between two types of university. The traditional theory-based universities, the research universities exist, but because of the nature of the secondary education systems in many European countries, where students are perhaps going to a different type of secondary school depending on their own skills and aptitudes, we also have applied sciences universities in many countries, which are those more project-based learning experiences. The degrees will be 3 or 4 years long, typically in most areas, so it matches with what we've seen elsewhere as well. We have centralized application systems and decentralized application systems. So again, like we've seen in other countries, some places will have a government controlled system you apply to, others you apply directly to university. And then the final point is, again, a very different culture as to what we have, is that whereas in most English-speaking countries, we have a very high bar to get into a university. So the selection procedure is really happening from high school into university. In many European university systems, we actually have a relatively low bar to get into university, more of an eligibility question, but potentially quite a high bar to stay in. So what you will find in a lot of systems is you might be able to relatively easily access the first year of university, but then there will be very high hard exams with very high pass marks to stay in that university after the first year. Culturally very different from what we find in the UK, the US, Canada, where potentially the bar to get in is quite high, but then once you're in, the bar to stay can be quite low. I'll delve into some more of these key themes, and I'll delve into some examples as we go, but hopefully that kind of sets the scene a little bit with what we're talking about. Now, obviously in all of this and in the organisation that we're presenting today, we've also got to understand that the passport residency EU thing also gets quite complicated. The big thing I need to understand, there is no single rule. So I can't sit here and say, with this thing, this passport, this residency, you will be fine for everywhere in Europe. They are all individual countries with their own legal systems, their own controls of sort of how immigration works and how that funds the university sector, particularly in the difference between courses taught in English or not, and universities that are private and universities that are public. But let me just give you some, again, generalities to go from there. Some countries will offer EU fees if you have an EU passport. Doesn't matter whether you ever lived in the EU, lower fees with an EU passport. Some countries will be passport and residency, and how they define residency will be different within each place. So it's understanding all the fact that just because you've got an EU passport doesn't automatically mean the same thing in every country. You'll need to look at the rules of that. That will also not just impact the fees that you pay, but potentially the admissions process you go to and your likelihood of your chances of getting it. There are some countries, however, who make no difference whatsoever. So having an EU passport and non-EU passport doesn't change anything. Private universities, in a similar way to like a private secondary school, are completely the same, regardless. And so again, you've got to delve into the nuance of this kind of stuff. And I don't want to go down routes of having to sort of pick up problems for families down the line, where you've made an assumption that because it works this way in one jurisdiction, it's the same elsewhere. You really need to delve into the complexities of all this kind of stuff. Mostly because in those public universities, we're dealing in education systems which are extraordinarily tightly regulated by the governments of the country, or in the case of some countries, the region of a country. If you think, for example, Belgium has 3 different regions and 4 different communities, that's 4 different higher education systems just existing in one country. So a lot of complexity in here in terms of how passports and residency, and this is where Henley and Partners can help you kind of navigate these things to figure out if you are making these choices, what does that potentially open or close off for you further down the line? Let me delve then into some of those general themes and give a little bit more weight to it. I mentioned that in continental Europe, and actually also in the Republic of Ireland, which we also need to remember is still in the European Union, there are 2 types of university. Historically, in the kind of, Britain, Canada, America, these more kind of applied universities might have a little bit of sort of stigma and snobbishness applied to them. That isn't really the case when we deal with the European universities, because of the fact that we have a secondary education system that accepts the fact that young people have different skills and different aptitudes. Not everybody is suited to going to classes, sitting down, shutting up and doing what they're told to write some exams, that people learn in different ways. And so though these are called different things in different parts of Europe, broadly speaking, we have the research universities and the applied sciences universities. A research university would be the kind of stereotypical thing a 10-year-old would draw if you asked them to draw a university. It's libraries, it's lectures, it's labs, it's books. In effect, you're going through a process as a student at a research university where you're being taught to respond to questions that start with how. So I've gone completely wrong. Let's start with why. Why does this thing happen? Why do chemicals react in a certain way? Why did this author write a book in a certain way? Why was that battle fought in a particular way? It's all in the head, it's theory, and you can see these traditional subjects that would be in a research university. The applied sciences, correctly, are the how. So it's not why do these things happen, it's how do I do something? But that can be, again, very academic things. You'll see in the list of things there, things like nursing, art, music in there, these things where it's about acquiring a competency, getting better at actually doing something. But equally other things like business, design, tourism, teaching, those kind of things as well. They both lead on to particular fields of study. They both will lead on to master's degrees. The applied sciences tends to be a year longer because of a year of internship, but they are very well regarded in both areas. Sometimes the applied sciences universities can potentially actually be more competitive than courses at a research university if there are extra selection procedures. It's just showing that different students learn in different ways. And a lot of countries have recognized that we need to teach for certain careers in different ways. Does a primary school teacher necessarily need to know all the theory in a Bachelor of Education? Does a student who wants to become a business manager need to understand management science? So different ways of looking at there. Another thing that we have when we start to delve into Europe is that we end up seeing a massive difference between very comprehensive and very specialist universities. Again, typically in English-speaking countries, what we tend to see is most universities teaching most subjects. So you want to go to University College London or University of Toronto or University of California, Los Angeles, they're offering massive ranges of subjects. So you can go there to study fine art, you can go there to study engineering, you can go there to study history, you can go there to study chemistry. And so because you have these big universities offering lots of subjects, they tend to have quite an undergraduate focus. They're putting a lot of resources and effort into the experience for those students aged 19, 20, 21, etc. There'll be a social life that's designed for a lot of those kind of students, and the accommodation experience will be for that as well. And that's a phenomenal experience for lots of students. But what you sometimes can find is students might also be looking at specialist universities as well. And Europe will have many more universities that really are focusing around a fairly narrow band of subjects. So I'll give an example, for example, of some business schools in Europe. So lots of French business schools, places you might have heard of, ESSEC, EDHEC, ESCP, NEOMA, SCHEMA, they all have these acronyms. Now, those universities are likely offering only 1 or 2 undergraduate degrees, and they'll all be in business. And that's a fairly narrow bottom of a pyramid. They might be offering 20 or 30 master's degrees, masters in management, masters in finance, masters in human resources, masters in communications, and there may be MBAs and executive education courses. So that whole culture of that institution is going to be very much focused on postgraduates. It's going to have a social life, which is going to be catering to a slightly more mature audience, and accommodation, which again is going to do the same. And so a student who might be going and studying, say, business at a big comprehensive university will be mixing with a bunch of different students from across different areas of academic interest and playing maybe in a soccer team or music group, whatever, with people who have all those interests. And the feel of that institution will be probably quite focused on the sort of clothes and interests that 19 to 23-year-olds will have. You go to a very focused business school or other specialist institutions like the Carl Benz School in Germany that does automotive engineering, or art schools or drama schools or design schools. The whole culture of that is going to be focused around that area. So it wouldn't be unusual if you go into a business school where you're going in every day with 100 other students doing your bachelor, but there are thousands doing their master stuff. You might be expected to be in business dress every day. You're not likely to be massively popular sticking on heavy metal music at 3 in the morning in the accommodation with the professional sleeping next door to you, who's paying thousands and thousands and thousands for their MBA. So different kind of feel as to what actually the student might want, not just in terms of the subject, but actually that wider community that they want to be part of. If you're picking a specialist institution, the ethos of that university is going to be around that specialism. I think the Carl Benz School is a great example of this. If you want to go and study automotive engineering at the Carl Benz School, you're going to want to make cars your life, because that's the point of it. There's no one there who doesn't like cars. It's called the Carl Benz School for a reason. Another thing to understand is that there's actually a fairly distinct difference between the nature of English taught programs in Europe. How widely is English spoken within that institution? There are many universities which are offering just a handful of English taught bachelor's programs within a university that's mostly doing courses in the language of that country. And so whereas in that course, you've probably got all the lectures, the assessments, the projects are happening in English, what we've got to understand is that beyond that course, there's going to be a different level of familiarity with the language than if you were going to go to a university, perhaps one of those American style ones, or a big internationally focused institution where everything is happening in English. So if I take an example of a student who maybe wants to go and study economics in Italy, that student might be able to look at a university like Bocconi in Milan. That is a university with a vast array of courses happening in English, which means that all those bits of the administration, paying your bills and sorting out your taxes, getting tutoring help, getting a careers interview, is also going to happen in English as well. And as is the nature of people in businesses, all those cafes and bars and shops that are within the environs of the university are also going to happen in English as well. So if a student going there can have a slightly softer landing in terms of their ability to go and study in a different country, because they know a lot of the language stuff they don't have to get immediately, though over time you'd obviously hope they pick up some Italian. The student, however, could go to one of the local public universities in Milan, say Politecnico di Milano, or somewhere bigger, somewhere else like Sapienza or Tor Vergata, which do offer courses in English in that kind of subject area. But it's a university designed for Italian kids studying in Italian. So all those other things of the careers help and paying your bills and that kind of stuff isn't really going to be designed for a non-native speaker. And obviously someone will be willing to help. But you've got 60, 70,000 students studying in Italian and 1,000 only studying in English. You can see how that wider milieu of the university, not just within it, but the clubs, the bars, the cafes, is going to require the student to have a much deeper dive into the language more quickly. So it's not because the fact that, well, this is in English and this is in English, therefore it's the same. You need to think about that wider experience and the pros and cons of having that deep immersion and sink or swim very quickly, or the slightly softer process of working that out. Okay, beyond that there, let me then talk into some of the more popular options that students were looking at in terms of the countries. Now, ironically, given that there is Ireland in the European Union, it's an English-speaking country, it actually isn't the most popular place to go and study in English in Europe. Certainly now the UK has left the European Union. The Netherlands is the place to go for a number of reasons that I'll touch on. But the biggest one is actually, it is to all intents and purposes an English-speaking country. Through various kind of complex reasons, the one that was best explained to me is the fact that, unlike in many non-English speaking countries where the kids' cartoons are all dubbed into the language, in the Netherlands that they keep it in English and then subtitle it in Dutch. So basically, kids watching Peppa Pig from 6 months onwards are also learning another language because they're having the translation in front of it. Regardless of whether that's true or not, there is a very high level of English spoken in the Netherlands, and therefore a very high number of bachelor's degrees fully taught in English. So what do we see in the Netherlands? Well, we see 3 types of universities. So those applied sciences universities, project-based ones, are definitely there. We have those famous research universities as well, Leiden, Utrecht, Tilburg, the 2 Amsterdam universities. We also have a 3rd type of university called university colleges. And these are where we are getting both that broader liberal arts and sciences curriculum that you find in the US model, added to a residential university experience. The university colleges tend to have their own kind of campuses. They are all linked to a research university, but not necessarily in the same place as it. So, for example, Leiden University has Leiden University College, The Hague. So it's down the train line from Leiden, and they're offering a different kind of experience. So you've kind of got something for everybody there as well. They will typically have a selection after the gate. That idea of, in a lot of cases, you can enter university with minimum eligibility. So many of these universities will just be saying, as long as you have passed 3 A levels or passed an IB diploma or whatever the equivalent might be in your home country, you can come to university. But that selection from year 1 to year 2 after the gate is going to be quite high. There are, however, some equivalency issues to delve into. I'll touch on more on this a little bit later on, where if a Dutch student has had to take this subject at high school, you would also have had to have taken that in what you've done in your last 2 high schools as well. Also worth touching on here, the Netherlands is one of those places where actually with an EU passport it is a relatively easy financial process. You don't have to have lived in the European Union to get the lower fees in the Netherlands. At the moment, the Dutch tuition fees are just over €2,000 per year for a 3 or 4 year degree. And you just need an EU passport to have that. You don't have to live in the Netherlands for that. And actually, at the moment, that first year is charged at 50%. So actually, you're paying a tad over €5,000 currently for a 3-year research university's bachelor's degree, just because you've had an EU passport. So potentially something to explore there. There are, however, some challenges with the Dutch system because of that popularity. Pre-Brexit, students from the EU who also were resident there with the passport flooded to the UK because they could get home fees in the UK and get a student loan to go. So since that has gone away, ambitious mobile students in the European Union who want a good deal for university are really left with Ireland and the Netherlands. As I'll explain later on, Ireland is a little tricky. So the Netherlands has had a very significant increase. You can see some of the statistics here from University World News. What that means is that where we have capacity issues, those are growing. There are some courses which are known as numerus fixus in the Netherlands, obvious things like medicine, for example, whereby the government says that we can only have so many of these students on a course. And so there are extra selection procedures a university might put in place. So an extra test or an interview and things like that. More students applying for them makes it harder to get into those. But the most obvious one is actually the accommodation issue. As I've mentioned, a lot of these universities don't provide accommodation. They do not see it as their job to provide a residential experience. So we end up with situations here whereby with huge numbers of students, if you're just rocking up in June or July to get a university offer, and then going out on your own to try and find accommodation in a place where you don't have contacts and there isn't really an obvious place to go to for it, you'll be scouring social media boards, posting on all sorts of things here. It would not be unusual for a student leaving it that late to maybe find they've got a 60 to 90-minute commute to university, because the popular student cities will fill up quickly with students securing that accommodation as well. So it's a great option, but there are some challenges in there as well. Okay, Ireland is an option that though a lot of students look at. It's kind of almost looks like a hidden gem of university in Europe. People kind of forget there's this other English-speaking country with great universities. Now, historically, they were the ancient universities of the British Isles. If you look at a place like Trinity College Dublin, in terms of its culture and its degree, it feels very similar to a Scottish university. Well, that's because until they got fed up with being treated badly by Brits a bit over 100 years ago, they were British universities. It was the same historic foundation of them. So if you're looking for that kind of UK kind of model in terms of the university experience, you can find that in the Republic of Ireland. It's a relatively small country in terms of its population, number of students, which means that they've had worked very cleverly to make sure there's a very significant range of options. So there might only be one or two places you could study a subject in Ireland. For example, there is only one veterinary school, but it exists. So students can find across the country, both of that academic and professional, what they would call the research and applied. There's a lot of options there as well. Where the complexity comes, however, is that you are going to be treated as an applicant differently depending on your passport and residency. Broadly speaking, EU or non-EU, but there's a little bit more into that as well. To be treated as if you are an Irish student, where you would pay only 3,000 euros a year for the tuition fees and apply through their central admissions office, the CAO, you need to have an EU or a UK passport because of the common travel area, and spent 3 of the last 5 years before you go to university resident in the European Economic Area. A lot of little nuance in there. If you don't have those things, then you are not applying through the CAO. You are paying higher fees. You are applying directly to its university, but you are probably going to find it much easier to get into the universities because you don't have to go through the CAO. So really important and complex nuance there in terms of passport and residency, and it's the EEA and the UK, not just the EU. Now, if you are within that EU process, if you've been in Cyprus or Malta or somewhere and you've got that things, then you need to understand why perhaps a lot of students from the EU are choosing the Netherlands over the Republic of Ireland. And that's because of how the admissions process actually works. Ireland runs a system known in my line of work as post-qualification admissions. So students will finish their high school education, and then based on the results that they get then, are they then filtered into different universities? So when you apply through the CAO, you list in a genuine order of preference the courses you want to apply for. And then when you take your exams, those final grades are converted to CAO points. So on one side of the screen here, I've got the A-level conversion, 2 points. So your best 3 A-levels, if you got 3 A stars, you would have 555 points. A 4th A-level would be scored there, or if you're taking an AS level, then there. And the same then for the IB in here, in terms of all those bits filtering together. Now, so you can see you've got these options. The places are then allocated by a computer based on the students who've applied to that course and the points that they've got. So what I've taken from here is Trinity College in Dublin, the lowest points that got a student into the course in the last cycle. So for theoretical physics, the students who got the last spot on that course had 590 points. So let's say hypothetically there are 50 spots on that course. Numbers 1 to 50 were allocated to the highest point scorers who had that as their first choice, and then the cutoff with 590. So if someone got 589, they didn't get onto that course, and the computer would then have looked at their second choice and so on. Now, the star here refers to the fact that there were so many students with this score. Now, 625 in this would be, you're looking at it going, oh, hang on, how do we get above 600? How do you get above 600 on here? You get 25 bonus points for taking maths. 625 is the highest points you could possibly get. The star here indicates that there were so many students who had that cutoff score that they actually then had to go to a random allocation to decide who gets in. So you can see where the Irish system, though simplistic in terms of the fact there's no reference, there's no writing for a CAO applicant, the outcomes are very unpredictable. They potentially are very high, and these happen normally in the 3rd week of August after you've finished high school before going to university. So a wonderful university system, but for students applying this way, some systemic factors that make it quite hard to predict. Now, if you are not going through the CAO, so you don't meet that 3 out of 5 years UK EU passport thing, you apply directly to each university. And generally, you might find that a student going through this Irish system for management science and information studies basically needs to have done nothing wrong ever and hope for a stroke of luck to get a spot. Student applying directly, paying more money, they might get in with grades 5, 6, 10, 15 points grades lower for the same course. So it's really important that you understand, if Ireland is who you're targeting, whether you are better or worse off holding certain passports and certain residency. It does impact the fees, but it very starkly impacts the chances of students for getting into that system. Okay, coming out of the complexities of Irish universities, what else is there? Those public universities, as we've seen, have some challenges in terms of how it works. And that's why, exactly the same way as we have private schools in countries around the world, we have private universities. These universities tend to be very internationally focused. They tend to be providing a very polished student experience, not just in terms of the classes, but also in terms of that wraparound careers, employability, residential societies and clubs service. And they're extraordinarily popular. This is a photo here of IE University in their main campus in the middle of Madrid. If anyone's ever flown into Madrid historically, you will know that there used to be 4 skyscrapers on the timeline. Well, there's now 5, because IE University built a 5th skyscraper for their campus, as you do as a university. But it gives you a sense of the ambition of these private European universities and the level of service that they're trying to provide by having these beautiful, well-resourced universities. And those would tend to be the ones that students might be applying to alongside those really famous British, Australian, American, Canadian universities. Would not be unusual for us to have a student applying to, say, an IE, a Bocconi, and the top US and UK universities as well. They see that as a very comparable experience. Now, therefore, those admission systems are going to be more on that kind of British American model, maybe interviews, maybe admissions tests, maybe essays that have to be written. So processes in there that can work very well. But if you are looking for those cut price options, then we do have those public universities around Europe. And here again, you've got to get into that mindset I mentioned of it working differently. I pulled out here a photo of KU Leuven in the Flemish part of Belgium. It's a wonderful university. It's an amazing place to be a student. I've lived in Belgium, as was said. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful place. This university, KU Leuven, ranks in the top 50 in some of those world rankings. So by some people's measures, it's a really, really world-class university. But what you'll find is, if you look at it, is that 3 C's at A level or a 24 in the IB diploma will gain you admission to it. Now, that's not the grades that are going to get you into a world top 50 university located in other parts of the world. But a university like KU Leuven will be working you very hard for that first year. It's going to cost you with an EU passport around about €900 to go there. And so you're not getting tutorials and extra help and this kind of stuff. You are sink or swim in it. So yes, it's brilliant. Yes, it's cheap, but don't go there thinking the first year is for beer, even though it's where Stella Artois is brewed. The first year is to work hard to get into year 2 after that kind of stuff. And so this culture of public universities is really important to understand in here. And you've got to be also aware that there are going to be some glitches, because in effect, you are having to fit into the admission system designed for students of that country. And because a lot of continental European countries are sifting students into different types of secondary school at age 12, 13 or 14, they're kind of already on a pathway. So you are really finding that you have to fit yourself into it. One of the challenges that you sometimes find is that the timelines might not match up. I was speaking to a student yesterday who really wants to study at university in Scandinavia. Basically had to show to him, as an A-level student, it's basically impossible to go directly from high school to those universities, because those high schools will finish their curriculums very early, maybe in March or April. And so universities expect to have the final documents of what you've done at school by that early spring, late spring period. If you then say, well, my A-levels don't come out until August, well, you're not able to then do it, and you're going to have a gap year. So timelines can be an issue. We've also got the fact that some of these high school diplomas that students are doing, for example, the German Abitur or the Swiss Maturat, are giving legal access to university. And so when the government bodies that control access to higher education look at international qualifications, they want to see that the students have got the same, which again might not match up a little bit with what students are doing in an A-level and IB system. And I'll show you a little bit more an example. And also understanding that you might also have to go through a process of converting those documents into something that makes sense. So if you are accessing a university which expects maybe to see its documents in the language of the country, say, for example, in Slovakia, you might have to get your documents that were issued in English formally notarized and translated into Slovakian, stamped perhaps by a local embassy, and then the university can do something with it. So you've got to understand that this is a system that's not really designed for international students, so you've got to go through a legal process there as well. And I'll just use Germany as an example of understanding where there is complexity in terms of this kind of stuff, and Germany and the IB diploma. So if you were taking the IB diploma, and this is taken directly from the IB organization's website, and you'd like to enter a public university in Germany, they're going to define a number of elements in here as well. Firstly, you must have had 12 consecutive years of full-time schooling. So you stepped out for a year and gone back into it, sorry, you're not eligible, you can't apply. 12 years of consecutive full-time schooling. And then among your IB diploma, you must have taken a combination of these kind of subjects. So you can see there's a range of different subjects in here as to what is going to be counted. But if you were thinking within the IB diploma that my only science is environmental systems and societies, well, again, sorry, you're not eligible because you need to have biology, chemistry, or physics. And then these subjects must have been studied continuously for 2 years. So if you get into the IB diplomas 3 months into it, that, oh, I don't quite like this subject, I want to switch it to something else, you make that switch again, you have become ineligible. It's not a case of, well, but what about this? But what about the context? Or let me get on the phone to them like you might do with a university in an English-speaking country. This is the law. You are eligible or you are ineligible. And this is where it's, again, it's culturally quite different to understand in some European countries. You might have a student with 45 out of 45 in the IB, 5 A stars at A level, denied access to a university, but a student with a 24 IB and scraping 3 Cs at A level, but in the right subjects, does get access to that university. And so this eligibility is a really important thing to understand when you're choosing these pathways. It's really dangerous to assume, well, if I go to somewhere in this country, I can get into their universities. Tess and I are dealing with families about Switzerland, for example, and Switzerland is really, really hard to get into if you're not doing the Swiss high school qualifications, certainly in their public university sector. Okay, what else is out there then, as I sort of wrap this up? We have American-style universities based in Europe. So you can get a degree from, example here, the American University of Rome, that is accredited in America. It's that American-style model of a broader liberal arts degree with a credit-based kind of building block style approach to education, but it happens to be in Europe. And wonderful opportunities for there if you like the flexibility of the American style, if maybe you're thinking about starting an American style degree possibly in Europe and then transferring to finishing it in the United States. All sorts of interesting pathways as there, you can follow them. And there's a number of the American universities abroad dotted around Europe in interesting places, and they can very much be a really good fit for students looking for a slightly different pathway. One of the things that Europe is famous for is its hospitality education. This is a photo here of 4 students at the École Hôtelière de Lausanne. Notice what they're dressed in. It's a speciality institution, and therefore they're expected to wear business dress and be very professional and stuff. No beards, for example, on the male students. But if you are looking into that kind of experiential education, you've got a student who maybe book smarts are not their thing, but people smarts really are. There are a wonderful suite of hospitality schools. Switzerland's very well known for them, not just EHL, Lyon and La Roche. The Netherlands has a few, Ireland has a few as well, but a very different concept of teaching and learning. A student in their first semester at EHL will be paired with somebody else living on their floor to clean each other's bathroom, because you're having to learn how to be someone working in hospitality. You're not going to be doing that all the way through, but it's a different model of what university is preparing students for. And the career outcomes from some of these hospitality schools are phenomenal for students who want to get into not just running hotels, but luxury goods, private banking, super yachts, all those kind of elements as well. We have increasingly over the last 10 years seen where universities have partnered together to piece together different elements so that students can experience multi-country experiences as part of their degree. Very famous Sciences Po, the really well-known humanities and social sciences university in France, has a wide range of joint degrees where you can go to Sciences Po, one of their campuses, for the first couple of years, and then you are admitted to a partnership program where you then go and spend your last 2 years in universities in the UK, University College London, in America, Columbia, Cal Berkeley, and so on and so forth. And then lots of different options here where you've got different pathways where students are able to experience different parts of the world, including perhaps different parts in Europe, as part of their degree. You've got US universities saying you can come and spend your first year in London, first year in Rome, and then come back to us as well. So a way of balancing those. And perhaps the most famous one at the moment is Trinity College Dublin with Columbia, where you can spend 2 years in Ireland and 2 years in Columbia, a really comprehensive dual degree program, becoming extraordinarily selective, but where students are seeing that kind of British Isles style educational experience, the more focused degree at the start, and then having that experience in a mega city at an Ivy League university like Columbia. Competitive options where students might be able to again find the best of both worlds and combine Europe with study elsewhere. Coming to the end as well, what else is out there? Increasingly what we're seeing is students who want to pursue pathways in the health sciences also looking at options in Europe. For example, here, Barts, the very famous medical school, part of Queen Mary's in London, has a full degree granting campus on Goza in Malta. So you can qualify as a doctor through a UK medical school in a campus in the European Union. And students who are looking at competitive options in places where they think, I want to become a doctor, a dentist, or a vet, are looking at increasing number of options in Europe. Now, typically speaking, we'll be talking about options taught in English. The Republic of Ireland has 5 medical schools, and obviously it is an English-speaking country. But once we start to look at medical programs taught in English in non-English-speaking countries, it's not like me going and studying history in Leiden, where it's fine because I'm just dealing with university stuff. If you are doing medicine, dentistry, veterinary medicine, at some point in your degree, you're going to be speaking to the general public. That general public are going to need you to speak to them in their language. So if you're going to study medicine at one of the 4 faculties of medicine at Charles University in Prague, for example, a wonderful university, unbelievably well-resourced and impressive medical schools, as well as learning the medical degree in English, by the time you are going to be dealing with patients, normally in, say, year 4, you're going to have to become fluent in Czech. You're not going into a hospital with someone screaming in agony and saying, excuse me, can I take your medical history in English, please? So yes, there are routes for all that kind of stuff, but complexities that come with it here as well. And also thinking about where those onward qualifications might go. Similar would be true with things like law or teaching, where as well as doing the degree, it's also the right to continue your training in that field of study. So you need to be thinking about those aspects as well. Okay, hopefully some sort of thematic things and a little bit more detail illustrating some of the points there on Europe. As Tess would want me to say, this is why we are here. This is what the education team at Henleys and Partners is there to help you with, and contact details are there. So let me hand back over to Tess to deal with any questions.
Unmute. Yes, we've had 2 actually, a couple of great questions here. One from Sabina. Hello, could you please give some information about universities or schools with double diplomas recognized in 2 countries? It could be a good solution for our clients who decide to relocate.
Yeah, so that's where you would find that universities have decided to go through a process to make sure that they are meeting the legal elements of both. Typically, it would be an EU degree through something called the Bologna process, which harmonized how all European degrees kind of fit together, and then the United States, typically. So you'll find universities that have decided to go down the routes of both. So, for example, the Central European University in Vienna is offering both a European and a UK degree. Bard College, US degree, Bard College in Berlin as well. So it offers you lots of pathways there. However, most governments around the world will have kind of bilateral reasons why they're already recognizing someone's degree. So getting a degree in the European Union and then wanting to go and study a master's degree in, say, the USA, you don't have to have a US accredited degree to do that. They will recognize it. It would only be when you are looking for a pathway to some kind of professional accreditation where that can get quite complicated. So things like teaching, law, medicine, where actually it's not just a university saying, oh, you've studied this content. It's that you actually have the right to do this profession.
Good. Brilliant answer. Thank you. And then Rachel, yes, we are. Sorry, Rachel asked if we were sharing this video. Absolutely, we are. And then, yes, we were asked if we covered elements of the Netherlands. We did.
You want me to touch a little bit more on this question, Tess? About education you want to study in Holland?
Good question, actually.
Yeah, I mean, we work with lots of students who are looking at it. It's not sort of a relocation kind of element to it. So UK passport, living in the UK, you are non-EU, now applying to the Netherlands, and it's not a completely new thing. There were students from outside the EU applying to the Netherlands before. So basically Brits have moved from the EU pile to the non-EU pile. Doesn't really impact things in terms of the admissions. It just means you're going to pay more. You would need to understand what subjects the student was taking at high school. So they're doing A-levels, what are the 3 A-levels? And then what might they want to study at university in the Netherlands, and then working through the selection procedure there. About 85% of courses in the Netherlands are what we would call open access. So as long as you meet that eligibility requirement, so typically 3 Cs in appropriate subjects, then you can go. The appropriate subjects is crucial. Yeah, as ever, what we tend to find stuff is that the UK is unusual in that our business degrees at university don't require you to have done maths before. The Netherlands, like many countries, you want to study business at university, you need A-level maths. No level of maths, sorry, you're not eligible. The 15% of courses that have these extra selections, this numerous fixus programs, will have a slightly more complicated process as well. Rachel, what I suggest you might want to do is to email Tess and maybe with a little bit more detail about your questions, and we can follow up from there.
Yeah, thanks, David. Has anybody else got any questions? Please write them in now. There's a couple of questions that I sort of tend to ask our panelists because they can be quite interesting. So if you have a student who started in a course in a European university and then decides that it's not for them, how easy is it to transfer subjects or courses within probably the same country, but maybe not, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, they have the European credit transfer system, which is supposed to have harmonized it, but the content doesn't necessarily match up. So it's possible, but it's going to be complex. If you are in a kind of European or UK style university degree where you're on this kind of pathway that's predefined, once you're trying to step off it and start again, there's never an ideal solution. There's always a trade-off to be made. That trade-off would be either, well, where would take me, which is likely going to be a university that actually has a commercial reason to take you, or the trade-off is to go back and start again. There may be certain circumstances, but it's typically you're at that. The counseling conversation I would have is never what's the best option, what's the least bad option in those circumstances.
Yes. Okay. And what about scholarships? I'm assuming public universities don't give scholarships.
On the whole, no. There are some places will have a few things. So there's a thing called the Holland Scholarship in the Netherlands, which can fund some options in there as well. Perhaps the most sort of powerful one actually would be a thing called the Stipendium Hungaricum, which is where actually there's a lot of money provided by the Hungarian government for students of many nationalities around Central and Eastern Europe to study at their public universities, but on the whole, not. Private universities can be very generous, up to full scholarships or full financial aid, depending on the university.
Okay, brilliant. I do have another question. Do we work only with Henley and Partner clients? Well, depends what you mean by that. Henley and Partners Education is a standalone service. So if you're not looking for investment migration solutions, yes, you can still come and work with us, although you would be onboarded through Henley and Partners. But yes, absolutely, you cannot be doing investment migration.
Yes.
Are there any other questions or anything else that you want to add, David, before we wrap up?
The only thing would be to return to the kind of caveats I said at the start, that unlike the other webinars in this series, which can be much more focused on one particular country, I'm having to be a little bit more general. So I would suggest that if you are exploring this, please do follow up with Tess. Take advantage of the services at Henley and Partners Education, just to explore some of the complexity of this, because this can get quite complicated quite quickly when we start to deal with public university systems, and it's wise at least to get, in the wonderful phrase, all your ducks in a row before you start to make decisions on educational choices, where to live, what residencies to try to gain, etc.
Okay. Well, listen, thank you very much. If you've got about 20 seconds for another question. Yeah, there we go. There's another one in. Is there immigration? Sorry, I'm not sure what you mean. Whether we have student visas, maybe that could be the question.
I mean, yes, universities will sponsor for student visas in certain parameters. I mean, they're accepting students from around the world. In terms of sort of specific questions about immigration, you have to probably direct that via Tess to colleagues at Henley and Partners.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, then. Immigration options along with study.
So you would be typically on a student visa. That will have different legal restrictions based on it, depending on the country. And universities governments are always pretty hot on people using a student visa as a way to kind of migrate to the country. So the frameworks there are pretty tight. You would need to, again, speak to an immigration specialist to get more information on that.
Yeah, I think that's a wise response to that one. Yes, absolutely. Well, I hope that has been helpful. Just to reiterate, this will be sent to all of those who registered for this webinar. So keep an eye on your inboxes and you'll be able to see the recording, because David did share a lot of information there. And if you have any questions or would like anything followed up, then please get in touch with me. My email is here on the screen, and follow up with your particular questions. So thank you again. It's been lovely welcoming you today. Tomorrow, I think, if I'm not mistaken, at 9 o'clock in the morning, we have our final webinar, this time with Sarah Natch, and she will be talking about Australian and New Zealand universities. So do join us then. Otherwise, thank you so much, David. Thank you again for being part of all of this, and we hope to hear from you soon. Thanks a lot. Take care. Thank you, David. Bye.